Welcome to the Atlanta Global Studies Symposium. My name is Juan Carlos Rodriguez. I'm co-director for the Georgia Tech Center, and I'm very pleased to present Yehimi Cambrón today, who's going to be sharing her work with us. Yehimi is a documented artist and activist based in Atlanta and born in San Antonio Villalongín, Michoacán, Mexico. She became undocumented at 7 years old when she immigrated to Georgia, where she grew up on Buford Hwy, the multicultural heart of Atlanta. Cambron's work centers immigrants and predominantly reflects the experiences of undocumented Americans. Her landmark murals in Atlanta historically assert the presence and humanity of immigrants, depict the intersectionality and complexity of her stories. She earned a full scholarship from the Goizueta Foundation to attend Agnes Scott's College and graduated with a BA in Studio Art in 2014. Her work is very well known. It has been a very impactful and inspiring work, and I would like to welcome Yehimi to the stage. I would like to call her La Mariposa de Buford Hwy. Con ustedes, Yehimi Cambrón.
Thank you. Okay, how do I follow that? This is not usually how things start off for me when I come and speak, but I have to say that this is also something that has been weighing very, very heavily on me for some time, and especially after Tortuguita was murdered. And I do have my thoughts that I would like to share about the topic in relation to my work. So if you just hang in there with me, I'd love to jump into my artist talk and just start from there and start from my own story and my own experience. And yeah, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for hanging in there with us. Let's see, I actually have to open my top. Okay. All right, just a second. And those of you that speak Spanish know that my last name is Cambron, and don't forget the M, because then you're saying cabron, which, depending on what country you're from, that could mean different things. I always have my name misspelled, and when people write cabron instead of Cambron, I'm like, just call me la cabrona already, please. If you're gonna do that. See, the M is there. I'm an artist, and through my artwork and my own experience, have become an activist. I feel like it's been something that has been inseparable from what I do because of my lived experiences as an undocumented person. I had an experience not too far away from here when I was in high school, where I was selected as the third place winner for an art contest hosted by the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust, sort of on the legacy of what happened and the victims of the Holocaust. And I was supposed to go to the Georgia. Well, I went to the Georgia Capitol under that golden dome, which by then, at the time, it didn't have the symbolism that it does for me now. And I went with my mom and my little sister. I was supposed to get $50, which at the time I was like, I'm securing the bag. I felt like it was a lot of money, and I was really excited to use that money to, I was at the time making jewelry and selling it to to raise money for college. Not that would have ever paid for college, but that was my plan. And I showed up in celebration and very excited. I was publicly recognized and given a certificate in front of everyone, and at the end of the ceremony, my My teacher went to claim my $50 prize and was told that I could not receive the prize because I didn't have a social security number. And I didn't really know what a social security number was. I hadn't started looking for work yet. I was not at that age. And so that moment was a huge slap on the face, right? It was a huge realization of what it meant to be undocumented for me. But I wasn't born undocumented, right? Like I became undocumented. It's a label that was placed on me when my parents made the courageous decision to uproot from our home in Michoacán. So I was born in Michoacán in this sort of like what I call the belly of Mexico, in a very mountainous region, in a pueblito called San Antonio Villalongín. Is anybody from a small town? No, okay, so yeah. So pueblitos is like everybody's your tío and your tía, everybody knows each other. And then we moved to Morelia, and during Morelia is the capital of Michoacán. During that time, there were years and years of family separation where, even looking back at family photos, I can see the absence of my father, right? My dad migrated several times during my childhood to Atlanta to work in the kitchens of Chinese restaurants, and would come back, would save a lot of money, live in an apartment with other immigrant men who were also here working, and would come back, and then another of us was born and he would come back to Atlanta. So my experience in Mexico was that of family separation. I credit my mom as la chingona who put her foot down and said to my father, like, either we stay here and we starve together, or we risk crossing the border without inspection, because there really was no other avenue for us to do so, to come to the US and live in Atlanta, where we already had family, and just live here for 5 years. 23 years later, here we are. So there were very few moments like this where my dad was actually there. I was 7 years old, so right about that age, and there's this photograph of me with butterfly wings that my mom made me. And so I always say that my mother gave me my first pair of wings. And at that age, at 7, we immigrated to Buford Hwy. And I know that most of us have probably heard about Buford Hwy as like a place where you get delicious, cheap ethnic food, right? And that really bothers me, because Buford Hwy is so much more than that, right? Buford Hwy has that delicious food and the culture and the vibrancy because of the people who live there. And the people who live there are immigrants. And the people who live there are mostly undocumented. Or my community, right, that I grew up with. So Buford Hwy is really, to me, the immigrant heart of Atlanta. And it's the place that helped us transition from, being newly undocumented to this new life that we were about to experience as undocumented Americans. I went to Cross Keys High School. Do I have any DeKalb County school grads? Okay. So I went to Cross Keys High School. I graduated in 2010, and ever since I got here, without speaking English, the art classroom was a safe space for me, because I didn't have to speak English to be able to communicate or to be successful. So being in the art classroom gave me back my confidence as a young immigrant kid. And so I was always in the art classroom. But then I had this experience as a young artist where I was being told that because I didn't have a set of numbers, I didn't deserve to be compensated for my work. So when I was in the college age years, and I don't know if we have any educators in the room today. I know there will be a lot of educators here this weekend. But when I was in that age of like my junior and senior year, I really had to have many conversations with my teachers, my educators, on really educating them on my own experience as someone who is undocumented and what that meant, which I was still figuring it out, right? Like I was still like trying to apply for jobs. I would get the jobs, And then they'd say, you just have to send us your social security number. And I would then refer that job to my US citizen cousins, right? So I couldn't get hired. I ended up working at Plaza Fiesta. I was making like $5 an hour and it would take forever to get paid. So that was the challenge. And then when I got to my senior year and I started looking at accessing higher education, I also realized that I was grappling with Georgia's anti-immigrant discriminatory policies against undocumented students. And one of those policies is that there is a, for undocumented students, you have to pay out-of-state tuition to any public university. So places like Georgia State, though I applied, would have not been possible because I would not have been able to pay for it. So I did apply to Georgia State, actually. I got in. But I ended up going to Agnes Scott College, which is an all-women's private liberal arts college that I think because they are a private school, they had more of a liberty in how they allocate their scholarship money. So I ended up going to Agnes Scott. And this moment when I graduated high school in that air conditioning less gym at Kroskis High School, I hugged my parents and I kind of felt like in that moment I was providing them hopefully a little bit of relief for all they've sacrificed to do what they've done for me and getting me here and making that, taking that risk, right? So I went to Agnes Scott College, and I think it was at Agnes Scott where I really started, where I really had access to an education that was liberation, right? Because I started understanding how the systems of privilege and oppression work, right? I started understanding the history behind why I was undocumented. Why do people have to leave their countries, right? And I remember being in Mexico and like being so poor that in our like makeshift home that my father built, where my mom had to put pots and pans all around the floor every time it rained to catch the rain, right? Where it wasn't a safe place for us to live because there were constantly people trying to break in, and my father was here. So that education at Agnes Scott really fired me up, and I started using my artwork to explore my own experience as someone who is undocumented. And so some of the artwork that came out of that time period is really dark, and I would say a little like, you know, like I think I was depressed. Didn't know it at the time, but really this time period when I created these, I remember there being, and this is a lot of these like memories and thoughts have been coming up for me, especially as I was thinking about what is happening in our city and this conversation that we're having about Cop City, right? Thinking about my own relationship with policing. And so during this time, there was a lot of anti-immigrant legislation being proposed at the Capitol. I remember there being a lot of fear for raids, ICE raids. ICE is Immigration Customs Enforcement. And what another thing that really stands out to me is the 287G program, which 287G is a program where police enforcement can basically collaborate with police departments. And so then for me, growing up undocumented and my parents being undocumented, ICE became synonymous with the police for us. And I remember my dad would drive because he had to drive to work, but I remember sitting in that car, and anytime a cop pulled up next to us, we would not breathe. You know, like we were holding our breath. And that fear is something that I felt even a little bit after becoming a DACA recipient. So I couldn't help but think about those moments, and thinking about the conversations happening now, and thinking about the work that I was creating and how trapped and scared I felt, right? art became a form of therapy for me because I was like exploring all of that fear and trauma through the artwork, right? And so all of that changed. This like really dark, sad work, sad self-portraits changed when I became a DACA recipient. And that fear too of like, I remember, so okay, when you're a DACA recipient, you get this document here. It's an employment authorization document. This was my first ever. I have like 7 now because I have to renew every 2 years, and I'll talk a little bit more about DACA. But one thing, actually, let me talk about DACA first. One thing I always mention, this is such a complex like issue. I think it's hard to simplify, right? And if you want to learn more, I think it really requires you to like go and dig and hear the stories and learn more. But DACA did two main things. It gave undocumented young people who immigrated here as children a process through which they could apply for deferred action, right? Deferred action for childhood arrivals. And when you apply for DACA and you are granted DACA, you get a work permit. So with that work permit, the one I'm holding in my hands, that employment authorization document, you can go and get a driver's license. And for those 2 years that you're a DACA recipient, you're protected from deportation. So I grew up with all of that fear, right? And then all of a sudden, I was protected. And so in becoming a DACA recipient, even with all of its incredible shortcomings, I did feel that shift into having a little bit of access to privilege, and a lot more access to privilege than so many people in our community have. I started driving, and I remember like when I first started driving, still feeling that fear, like that immobilizing fear that started going away over time. And so I think to me what that indicates is that like the more access that you have to privilege, the less you can be scared of policing, right? And that says something. So another thing about DACA that I always mention, it doesn't matter where I'm speaking or who I'm speaking to, is that it would not have been possible if it had not been for all the undocumented activists who have put their bodies on the line to disrupt spaces and get their message across. And so I could not help but think about that when this was happening today, right? And I've said this so many times, I've talked about it so many times, and it really struck me today because I know that these like strategies of protesting have been what have led to the privilege that I have today. I wanted to point that out. I felt it was important. I always mention it because a lot of the people who did like the sit-ins like at the White House and in Congress were people who like ended up not even being able to qualify for the program because either they aged out or they had then a record, right? So I do feel like I'm benefiting from their activism and from their work. And even if my activism is very different from that, like I feel like I have to always mention it and always honor it, and also remind people that there are so many people in our community who did not get to benefit from the program. Yet I think just today or yesterday I saw that President Biden is expanding healthcare or trying to expand healthcare to DACA recipients. And the first feeling that hits me is that guilt of like knowing that there are so many people, so many of my former students that I used to teach at Cross Keys High School who will not get to benefit from that because we're now in a time period where because of the age limitations on DACA, there is a generation that is growing up without those protections and that will not be able to apply. So my artwork changed as I came into this like new new privilege of being protected from deportation. And a lot of my work shifted to focus on my family, to focus on other undocumented people around the country. I started creating work especially about my parents and really trying to find a way to honor them. This was the first time I titled my artwork Monumentals or Monuments, which is now the title of many of my murals here in Atlanta. Even though they were small pieces, I wanted to use them as a way to honor my parents and my family. I graduated in 2014 from Agnes Scott, and I love sharing this picture because it echoes that first picture from my high school graduation where I'm hugging my parents. And they're kind of a common thread through my work, as you will see, and have always really inspired my artwork and my, just like what I want to do with my work and how I want to serve my community. I'm going to skip past the teaching a little bit, but I did end up becoming an elementary school teacher through Teach for America, and this was when Trump was elected, like during that period. So it's 2015 to 2017, and it was a really challenging time to be teaching. Not that today is not. I think it's probably a little even harder, and I won't get into that, but I remember teaching phonics and numeracy and being like, what am I doing? And in an effort to get closer to the community that saw me grow into the arts and a creative space, I decided to transition to teach art at the high school from which I graduated at Cross Keys High School. One of the first things that happened when I started teaching at Cross Keys was, I think that first month in 2017, Trump's administration announced that they were rescinding DACA. And the only thing I felt was appropriate was for me to use art and activism to help students who were feeling the despair that I was feeling, to sort of come together and be in solidarity with each other. So we had a Here to Stay rally, and just me being an educator who is undocumented with DACA, I think really helped guide those conversations with students, because oftentimes, like, administration doesn't really know what to do, right? Like, they don't know how to handle students who are coming. And that's a very generalizing statement, right? But what I saw when I was a teacher in the classroom is that administration was not always prepared in dealing with these types of situations. I had a student, one time I was walking to the front office, and somebody please give me a 10-minute, thank you, warning. But there was a student crying in one of the restrooms. I was on the way to the front office. The student was on the phone with a police officer who was detaining her mother because her mother made a right turn at the wrong time at a red light. And the mom didn't have a license. And my dad's been there. Like, I have had to run to where he is because he's being pulled over for a minor traffic violation. And so I knew what to do immediately. So I shouldn't have left school with a student in my car, but I did, because I knew that getting there as soon as possible was the best thing I could do. And I knew that I was showing up with my privilege as a teacher who spoke English, right? And to be able to have a conversation with him and say, like, hey, this is the situation, and this is what could happen if she does get arrested. And would you consider, like, letting her go with a ticket? And he did. And I think it was important that the student was with me, and I think it was important that I explained to him, like, all of the, like, what happens when people get pulled over by the police and then end up in being sent to a detention center because they're undocumented, right? That's how we experience family separation. And so I drove back with the student and the mother, and she was able to, like, pick up her kids from school after they got out, her little kid who was an elementary school student. And so these things come up all the time, and students just go to class, right, and sit with it, because they don't have anywhere to go. She didn't even want to talk to me, you know, and I had to kind of coax it out of her. So, and this is like just one example that I've seen as an educator, but I know so many of my classmates have dealt with that kind of thing, like parents being picked up in the morning and then them having to go to school. So I felt, I was really glad that I was really in turmoil as well, because my future was at stake, but I was glad that I was there and we were able to kind of figure out how to take action together. Being back in my community really allowed me to jump into my artwork again. That same year in 2017, Living Walls came to Buford Hwy to do a public art conference to celebrate Buford Hwy. And to me, Buford Hwy is synonymous with immigrants. So I felt like I had to create something that was a celebration of immigrants. And this is Havana Sandwich Shop. The first thing I wanted to do was paint a mural of my mother. That's like my broke artist way of like buying my mom a home, right? And so the owners didn't want a specific face. My mom worked there. Like that was the first place she worked when we immigrated here. And so I was like, oh, it would be perfect. They didn't want it. So I proposed this and I explained the symbolism. So this is the Education as Liberation Monarch. The one part of the monarch, as you can see, is the wing of the monarch, and the other one is an open book. And so this is the intersection to me of like my identity as an educator and as an immigrant. And I felt this had become such a universal symbol for DACA recipients, for undocumented people, for immigrants, and that the symbolism of the butterfly, which you'll see through my work, is also really important. It is this very fragile creature, right, that goes on this epic journey and crosses borders, right? And every generation that makes that journey up north from Michoacán, which is my home state, gets stronger and stronger. And so I've included the monarch butterfly in my work as a symbol of that resilience and as a symbol of that fragility as well, because there's that duality in our experience. My first mural I used for activism, right? I had a phone banking event here in January, I think, of 2018, when Congress was debating adding the DREAM Act to the budget, which would give people like me some sort of path towards citizenship. And I think that really made the owners uncomfortable. Someone spray painted over the hashtag here to stay under my name, and you know, the person who did it didn't want to destroy the mural. They just wanted to silence the message. So this was my first lesson where I was like, you know, the artwork, the colors are welcome, but people don't want to hear the stories. And it's every single mural I've painted there have been conversations like that have come up about the stories behind the artwork. So to protect the integrity of my message, rewrote the here to stay. And I got a video, and I was gonna like share that I had fixed it. And I was gonna ask people to talk, to like express to the business why they felt this mural was important to the community. They didn't wait they just like the very next day started painting over the mural. I got an email from the owner that was like, hey, this is a very divisive topic, a very heated issue, and we want to remain neutral. And for me, that like neutrality was like something I can't adopt. Like I cannot be neutral on things related to my humanity, right? And so something that made them feel so uncomfortable to me was just kind of like I'm just using my work to tell the truth and to share our stories, right? So they painted over the mural, and when they did that, I realized how much more the mural belonged to the community than it did to me, because people were so angry, and they started like calling the restaurant, dropping in and expressing their anger, rightfully so. And I was too stuck in mourning my first mural, because my artwork is very personal. It's a piece of me. And so this was my first baby, and it had been destroyed. You can kind of still see the monarchs under the paint, though. I love that. But when I saw how much momentum there was and how much energy, I felt like I had to use that so that we could have this conversation about why spaces like this are important. And so we raised money along with Living Walls to repaint the mural. It is bigger, it's better, it's bilingual, and it's at the Latin American Association where I feel like it is a place where a lot of immigrants go to seek services. And so it's in the right place, and it's right up the street from Havana Sandwich Shop, so I'm sure they see it all the time. But it was a huge lesson for me in how to wield my work and the power of my work, right? We had a panel discussion, and so many people from the community attended, so we were able to have a conversation about why work like this and spaces like these are important. In 2018, 2019, the Super Bowl came to Atlanta in January of 2019. So during that time, I worked on a mural, two murals, but this one's the one that I'm going to share today. This mural is titled "Monuments We Carry the Dreams," and as you can see, it's right around the corner from the Capitol. And so every time I drove that lift across the MARTA station to paint the faces of undocumented young people who are fighting to stay in the classroom, because not only is there out-of-state tuition, but now after I graduated from high school, I believe it was 2010 or 2011, the Board of Regents passed a policy that also banned undocumented students from the top public universities, and Georgia State was one of them. And so this mural is at Georgia State University MARTA station. And so I felt like it was just such a symbol of we are here, and we're here fighting for our education, and we're here not allowing our immigration status to define us and to define our dreams. And to do it right around the corner from the place where session after session there is all this anti-immigrant legislation being proposed really meant a lot to me. And I feel like it healed that broken heart of that 16-year-old girl that didn't get her $50. And I could not stop thinking about that when I was driving across the street on the lift to paint, right? So, yeah, I want to talk about all the stories, but we won't have time to cover that. This was the first mural of a series of murals that I've titled Monuments. The next one is titled Monuments, Our Immigrant Mothers. I finally got to paint my mother. But this mural was really the wall was very large, and I wanted to make sure that I was including the voices of other immigrants, of other immigrant mothers in Atlanta. So Ms. Kapemwa is the mother of one of my former classmates. They're from Zambia. And Ms. Nguyen, who is the mother of one of my former students at Cross Keys High School from Vietnam. And I originally designed the mural to put my mom at the center because she's my mom. But there was a mural there before that that the Black community in Decatur, this is in Decatur, really felt identified with, right? And so there was a note on my mural that said, "Why are you erasing the Black women?" And the mural was painted by two artists who lived in different continents, and the figures that were on the mural were indigenous figures, but that doesn't matter, because what matters is that Black women in the community felt identified to the mural, right? And so here I come painting, and I paint this whole wall yellow, and I thought back to my mural being painted over and how alarming that must have been for people who felt humanized by the work. And so I felt a responsibility to make that change and place Ms. Capemmo front and center. And also in realizing that Black immigrants are disproportionately targeted by ICE. I felt like this would allow me to bring that into the conversation when I'm in spaces like this. And to also remind people that the immigrant community in Atlanta is not just Latinx. The immigrant community all over the country is not just Latinx, right? It is a global, it is a global issue, and it's an issue that pertains to all of us. And we are doing a disservice to people who are not Latinx by not including them in the conversation, right? The monarch butterflies accompany the people in the mural because of the symbolism that I referred to earlier, and I just wanted them in this sanctuary of desert plants and flowers, which survive in extreme environments, just like the people in the mural have done. My most recent mural in this series in Atlanta is titled Monuments, Atlanta's Immigrants. It is at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium's Home Depot backyard. And I couldn't believe that I was painting the faces of immigrants at the Home Depot backyard. Not because I felt like I didn't belong there, but because I'm like, how are they letting me do this? And so it was. There were also a lot of interesting conversations that came up while I was painting that mural. I wanted to put my father in this mural to continue putting immigrant parents and undocumented, like older people front and center, because the conversation is so centered around undocumented youth and DACA. I felt like I needed to continue bringing who I call the original dreamers into the conversation and into the center of the conversation, because we're labeled dreamers, but everything that people admire about dreamers is thanks to our parents. My father is surrounded by other immigrants and undocumented people from Atlanta. They all have ties to Atlanta. Mamadou was a student at Freedom University. Please look into Freedom University. It is a modern-day freedom school that provides access to education for undocumented students in Georgia who are banned from our universities. And Mamadou, I met him through there. Sombo was actually a student at Agnes Scott when I was there, and I had no idea that she was undocumented because she wasn't out. But then connected with her, got to paint her. Then Raymond from the Philippines, and Luis, who is Mexican. And so there's all these layers to this mural, and the portraits and the way in which people are portrayed that I feel like allows me to talk about Islamophobia and anti-Blackness particularly in the Latinx community, and homophobia, right? Like Luis is a gay man, and he chose his photo, and I love that because he has this beautiful crown of roses on his head, and then this like very masculine Mexican mustache like my dad's, right? And so I think it's great to see that like similarity, but also be able to address like that machismo and the homophobia that I've seen and have grown up with in my own community. I'm gonna skip through these, and I'm gonna stop talking about the public art and jump into a project which actually kind of connects to the conversation that was happening before the mayor left, and some of the things that I have brought up along the way. But this mural is located by the airport. It is titled, "We Give Each Other the World." And what I would like to bring up about the mural is that this was not a mural about immigration or immigrants, right? I was hired to paint a mural that was community responsive, that was responding to what the community looked like, what they wanted, what they aspired for, what their dreams were, and who they felt was not included in the conversation enough. And through that process of conversation with the community, I ended up with this. And the butterflies in the mural actually represent a project that the city of Hapeville did to revitalize their community. And the monarch butterflies in the mural are representative of immigration. But I think people like saw this and were like, oh, she's painting more immigrants. Here we go. But it's a reflection of the community, and inevitably there is a conversation related to migration, because you can't talk about communities in Atlanta and you can't talk about the city of Atlanta and not talk about what immigrants are going through in the city, right, and their experiences. My public art has really, I don't know how to say this better, but in the past like year or two, I painted this mural in 2020. So in the time since then, I have really found my own issues with my artwork, right? I think people see them as like these happy, hopeful immigrants who are doing great. And I painted what I felt my community needed to see, like the spaces that I needed to see growing up that were life affirming. But I also feel like they are not enough to really communicating the complexities of the experience, right? And how nuanced the lives of immigrants are. And so there has been work that I've created that is sort of outside of the murals that I've been able to just kind of like produce in between all of those really big projects. The murals take me sometimes 2 to 3 months to complete, so they've taken the bulk of my time. One of them is this family portrait series that I showed at the Hwy Museum in 2019. Michael Rooks, the curator of contemporary art, told me that I was the first like openly undocumented artist to show at the Hwy Museum. And for me, what that meant was that I needed to use that space to bring in other undocumented people to the museum so that they could see themselves reflected in the artwork. You can see that there are these ghost-like layers almost camouflaged into the portraits. They are all like scans of our documents. And so you can see in the portraits like my mom's Mexican passport and her birth certificate. And then for me and my brothers, you can see our correspondence with USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and our correspondence about DACA. And then for my little sister, who is right here, you can see bits and pieces of her U.S. passport, which opening her U.S. passport was like, I had never, you know, and I don't have one. So it really was such an interesting experience, because there's this beautiful quote in there about immigrants, right? And it was so ironic to see it in the passport of the only person in the family who's not an immigrant, and that her whole family, right, was undocumented and was not being treated in the way that that quote talks about immigrants, right? So if those of you who have a U.S. passport, I hope you find some time later to take a look. But I really wanted to create more layered portraits of undocumented people. And so I can't fully document the undocumented experience through my artwork if I'm not also having these nuanced conversations. Another thing I felt was really lacking from my artwork was I felt like there wasn't a space where I was talking about the people who are suffering, dealing with this country's like most violent aspect of immigration, and that's immigration detention. So I created a piece called Chinga la Migra. I won't translate that. But you can look it up later, right? Chinga la Migra. If you forget, you can just look at my Instagram or my website and find it. But Chinga la Migra it didn't feel aggressive to me when I chose the title. It felt like the right thing to say in response to such a painful experience for people. And I've never had an experience directly with ICE, right? But a lot of people in my community have. And so I knew coming in that I was like going to be grappling with something that terrifies me, that has always terrified me, that has literally been in my nightmares, but that I had never experienced on my own skin. So my job for me was to move out of the way and to center the voices of the people who have been directly impacted, right? So I worked with people who, I'm sorry about that, who have, so this person, for example, I won't share her name, but she is a DACA recipient. She has 2 US citizen children, and at the time that she was pregnant with her second, her husband was pulled over for a minor traffic violation. The police officer pulled him over, pulled him over for not, I think he had said that he was on his phone or he was using his phone. So was pulled over and was then taken to Gwinnett County Jail. Gwinnett County was one of the counties, I don't believe they are anymore, and I should know this, but I don't, they're not, thank you. That one of the counties that their police department partnered with ICE through this 287G program. So what happens when there's a minor traffic violation, someone gets taken to jail, the police department is working directly with ICE, and so that person ends up at an immigration detention center. And immigration detention centers, a lot of them, this one specifically, Stewart Detention Center, the one that I created this piece about, is it's owned and operated by Core Civic, which is a corporation that is contracted by ICE. So this takes away a lot of accountability from the government in how undocumented people who are in these prisons are treated. Because they're not holding facilities, as I've seen on their website. I think they call them something along those lines. I'm like, God, it sounds like a hotel on their website, right? But they're prisons, right? And Stewart Detention Center specifically is one of the largest and deadliest detention centers in the country. The capacity at Stewart Detention Center was at the time, now it's 2016, but at the time it was 1,996. That's the bed capacity when I'm working on this project. So I felt that to show that quantity and to personify that, I had to hand cut 1,996 monarch butterflies, and that's what I did. And I did it with the help of those people who were coming forward and sharing their stories with me and who were directly impacted. So she told me her story about her husband being taken to Stewart and going through her pregnancy with him at Stewart Detention Center, and him being deported when she, was it before or after she gave birth? This is why they need to tell their own stories. I actually have a recording of her story which played in this space at the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, in their sliver space. So this, oh my goodness, that works too. This piece, Chinga la Migra, captures the voices and also shows people the quantity, right? At the center, we have 9 black monarch butterflies, which symbolize the people who have lost their lives at Stewart Detention Center. And the other voice that you hear in the space is a story of a man named Robert, who is a Jamaican immigrant who couldn't adjust his status even though the rest of his siblings were able to because of the age difference, right? Like there was something about he aged out and did not qualify for this adjustment of status. So his siblings are US citizens, his dad's a US citizen, and he was never able to become a citizen. So he was actually, he lived in DeKalb County, and he experienced houselessness, and that was when he was picked up by the police and sent to Stewart Detention Center after he served his time. So he served time in a state facility, and then ICE came and picked him up and took him to Stewart Detention Center. And he went through COVID at Stewart, right? And although his he had health issues, so his health conditions qualified for him to be released, ICE refused to release him. And so my hope with this, I had an interview with him over the phone, when he shared his story. So he was risking his life, basically, because what happens when you share your story and you speak up from within a detention center is that you get put in solitary confinement, right? And you get punished. And so I've considered putting their stories up on my website, but I think they need to be experienced with the artwork. So there will be another opportunity, hopefully in June. It's not official, so I'm like, there's no contract, so it's not official, but I am preparing to do a solo exhibition at Oglethorpe University Museum of Art, and one of the main pieces will be a third iteration of this installation. The second iteration happened at University of South Carolina's Upstate Art Gallery, and I'm gonna skip that because I know I'm running out of time. But the second iteration, I felt, okay, so I forgot I had these in here. So when aren't they cute? Watch this person like be in the audience one day. So this installation was at the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center. They do a lot of weddings. And so then I was seeing all these photos of couples in this space that was about immigration detention. And I'm like, they missed the point completely. Here we have one part of this installation was Nilsson, who I think on Instagram he's Icebreakers21. Nilsson survived 2 detention centers. One of them was Stewart, and he underwent a lot of violence while he was there. He went through COVID while he was there. He survived that. So in writing the names of the people who have lost their lives there, I felt like it couldn't be me and it needed to be someone who had experienced that. So Nilsson agreed to be a part of my installation. And so we have this moment where the artwork becomes more of like an altar, right? And then you see this. And not only does it infuriate me because I feel like there's like this blindsidedness, but also I think it really made me think about my responsibility as an artist to make sure that people get the point. So I was like, okay then, let's make a cage. And this was not something that I wanted to do because our community already sees the cages. We deal with this every day and we can't turn it off, right? And so the last thing I want to do is traumatize my own community, right? My own parents, my own siblings, myself. But I felt like people needed to get the point. Do y'all know Los Tigres del Norte? Raise your hand, Los Tigres. Okay, who has heard the song La Jaula de Oro? Yeah, so La Jaula de Oro is, I feel like it's one of those songs that like as an undocumented person, you hear that song and you cry. You know, and it always does, like, it's about that relationship with the U.S., that immigrants have with the U.S. as being in a golden cage or a cage made of gold, right? Because you are in the U.S. after all, but then you're dealing with all of this enforcement and fear, right? And so I felt like La Jaula de Oro was appropriate for this piece. There are 500 monarch butterflies inside, and then there are 446 emerging. I wanted to have an aspect of liberation because there are so many people within detention who are constantly organizing and protesting to fight for that liberation, right? And there are people in our own communities in Atlanta who are fighting to abolish ICE, right? To shut down Stewart Detention Center and places like Stewart Detention Center. So the monarch butterflies are also in this piece more like in shadow. I painted them black with India ink. I wanted them to appear as if they were in mourning in a way because I heard a lot of that pain and that mourning in those conversations with people who are dealing with that like immigration enforcement and who are specifically dealing with it through like their interactions with the police, right? I feel like my artwork has given me access to spaces like this, right? It has given me a way to talk about things that are sometimes really uncomfortable for us to talk about. and to like give it a visual language so that then there could be like words that are put to it. Growing up, I don't think I would have imagined in Atlanta that I would be able to say chinga la migra in a room like this, right? And so I think that shows that we're making progress. And I wish, in preparing for today, I really was thinking about what message I wanted to leave you with. And one thing that I'm really proud of as someone who grew up in Atlanta, especially now that I'm actually leaving in September to Chicago for grad school. I'm going to I haven't announced it yet, but I'm going to the School of Art Institute of Chicago. But as I'm preparing to leave and I'm thinking about the impact that Atlanta had on me, I see this city as the cradle of the civil rights movement, right? I remember being in 5th grade. I had just learned English, and I was at the MLK Center singing We Shall Overcome. And during my college years, I took time to study the civil rights movement, and I learned a lot about protest and activism and social justice from the leaders that made Atlanta what it is, right? And so I hope that in the conversations that we're having about immigration, about policing, which is directly related to immigration, that we're thinking about how we can do right by that legacy that Atlanta has. Because for me, seeing it feels like it's about to happen with Cop City being built, I do feel that we are doing a disservice to the legacy left behind by people like John Lewis. And as I was getting ready to come speak, I was listening on WABE to an interview with Rose Scott, and she was interviewing Angela Davis, which like Angela Davis, like right along with John Lewis, those are like the people that I look up to and that I want to model, right? She talked about how she was invited by the city council to be given an award, and I don't know the name of the award, but I encourage you to go listen to that interview. And there were students who disrupted the event and were chanting "No Cop City," and she expressed how happy that made her, right? Because she's had a lifelong journey in fighting for social justice and being in this space. And so she also mentioned that she returned the award, and that had she known, she probably would not have participated. And it meant a lot to me to hear like Angela Davis share her perspective on Cop City and what that means for policing. And so I also have been doing a lot of my own like educating myself, because I recognize that this is not something that I am educated on. Like I really don't know or wasn't. I'm in the process. And so I hope we all take the time to really do that learning and understand the impact that this will have on Black and brown communities and people like my family. Not me anymore necessarily, right? I'm a DACA recipient. I'm like protected for now. But it does eventually trickle down, and I have seen ICE raids and enforcement on Buford Highway in my own community, and I can't imagine that won't at some point start impacting the immigrant community as well, because it already has. So I could not close out without acknowledging, that like frustration and that anger that a lot of us are feeling, and we all like express it in a different way. And I'm glad that they had time to share that. So thank you for listening to me. I'm at a loss for words, honestly, but I think today is a day that I will always remember, and in a good way. So thank you for joining me and staying for my talk. I appreciate it. I think we have time for Q&A. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.